I don't play Beyblade. Beyblade is a way of life. There are those in life who train to be the best bladers in the world, and then there are their victims. Beyblades have been linked to 13 assassinations throughout history, and it was said the only survivor of the explosion of Mount Vesuvius was a blader and his bay. He would go on to be elected President of the United States. I don't leave the house without a loaded launcher in case someone tries to steal my wallet. Their funeral if they think their 9mm pistol has anything on my Burn Capricorn. It spins at, and starts, 100 revolutions a second, and is the closest thing in the known universe to hell. To gain a bay's trust and pull out its full power, you need to lay your soul bare for it. And in some cases your balls too. What, you've never been naked in front of your Beyblade? Okay, we got a lot of work to do. I guess what I have to ask is, are you ready to let it rip? The history of Beyblades sounds like I'm lying about the history of Beyblades. Like, of course I would say something stupid like it stretches back to the 11th century when Chinese merchants introduced the Koma spinning top toy to Japan during the Kamakura period. I would say that in the same breath that I said the Titanic sunk because a Beyblade pierced its hull. But that's what happened. Both times! Around 600 years pass, and the game that we now know as Baygoma had been fully formed. You would take a cone seashell and fill it with sand to give it some weight, then use wax to keep it from falling out. Then you would launch it at your friend's shell, and whoever's was left standing won. First to 3 points wins. It was a popular and ubiquitous game in Japan, to the point that shops would start selling dedicated Baygoma kits with seashells replaced with metal. They would have symbols emblazoned onto them, not just to give them some distinction, but also to change weight distribution, which would become a key feature of Beyblades. In fact, you probably already realized now that Beyblade is just a portmanteau of Baygoma and Blade. But before we can get into that, a world war needs to happen. Let's just keep it simple and say a lot of bays were launched. In a post-war Japan that was now heavily Americanized, dozens of new and interesting toys would be imported and manufactured that would leave the little discs in the dust. And by the end of the century, there were a countable amount of factories still producing Baygoma. Enter Takara Toys, a Japanese toy company who had seen what Bakugan would do for marbles and wanted to replicate that with spinning tops. Only problem was Bakugan wouldn't be made for at least another decade, so they failed twice before that with the Battle Tops and Sugegoma toy lines. These two toy lines were supposed to be big hits, unlike all those toy lines that are sent out to die, but it wasn't until Osamu Mashimo, an employee at Takara, proposed that the way to make the tops a success was to allow a degree of customizability that would get people more invested in the toy. This idea, along with a retooling of the top's construction, was it. They'd finally cracked the code and invented a Beyblade. And we're still feeling the effects today. The basic setup is this. Launch your bays into the arena at the same time, shouting 3, 2, 1, go shoot! Then all you can really do is threaten your opponent to make them quit. Sleep outs, where your opponent stops spinning, are worth a point. Ring outs, where you knock your opponent out of the arena, are also worth a point. First to 3 points wins. Okay, the innovations weren't really to the rule set. If it worked 600 years ago, it'll work today. That's why we're still drafting new musketeers. No, the innovation that made Beyblade a phenomenon was the customization. This initial line of Beyblades had 4 parts, and was categorized under the spin gear system. The bit chip, which was mostly pointless, but would have an animal on it to try to scare the opponent's Beyblade to death, the attack ring, which is what would clash with the opponent and determine striking power, the weight disc, which would help stabilize your Beyblade, and the spin gear you would spin on. Any one of these 4 parts could be swapped with any other bay's parts to help customize how your bay spun and how it behaved. If you wanted a bay that would bounce around the arena like a madman, customize it right and it'll blast through whatever you put in front of it. If you want to make an iron wall that endures anything, load it up on heavy parts and nothing's gonna move you. If you want to run away and wait until the opponent dies of old age, make a stamina type. Coward. Not only would a system like this breed endless customization that encouraged people to always be buying new products so they could have the edge on their friends, but it also gave a sense of pride and accomplishment in the finished product that was totally unmatched, and pretty much still is. When you win a Beyblade battle, it's because you're the man. You built the best Bey possible. You knew what you needed to beat your opponent, and you only have yourself and your parents' wallet to thank. Beyblades are a masterstroke in the easy-to-learn, hard-to-master mentality. The most interaction you have with the game after launching the Bey is shouting at it to increase its fighting spirit. Anyone with two hands can launch a Beyblade and has a pretty good chance of winning too. There's no complicated rules, no mechanics you need to understand. No, the top just spins. It's not until you start tinkering and doing mechanical work on your Bey, though, that you're gonna see the real success. Learning what parts work best, what certain parts even do, and how best to combine them. I called the bit chips useless, but even they have the purpose of providing a personality for your Beyblade. Now it's not just my seashell beat my opponent's seashell. No, Flash Leopard just beat Ultimate Dragoon. It gave people who played a real sense of accomplishment and pride out of their construction that made it a hit not just with young kids, but also older hobbyists who enjoyed the technical side of things. Predating both the game and the accompanying anime show, though, was the first Beyblade video game, Next Generation Beigoma Battle Beyblade. It featured early designs that would go on to be used in the series that followed, and pretty much nothing else in the series that followed. There was a heavy emphasis on gambling in this game. I don't know why that didn't carry into the main series. My Beyblade gambling den is the place to be. Up to 3 fatalities a night. Other than that, don't know, it's in a language I can't speak. Eventually in 2002, Hasbro would team up with Takara Toys to distribute Beyblades in the West, bringing the manga and anime along with it to bring the series to a whole new level of popularity. With Pokemon bringing a new boom for Japanese toys in the country, America was primed for something like Beyblades, and it was a massive hit. Hasbro's major innovation was changing Go Shoot to Let Her Rip when you launch your Beyblade, and what a change it was. This was the last positive contribution Hasbro had to the franchise. There were also a few mechanical differences in the transition from Takara production to Hasbro production, like attaching parts in different orders, but trying to understand a single Beyblade build was already a headache, so trying to find the differences in multiple was impossible. Oh right, the revisions! Now, I said that the Beyblades that were initially released used the spin gear system, but the system would be iterated on 3 more times to make the Magnacore system, the engine gear system, and the hard metal system. The Magnacore system added magnets that forced the Beyblades to talk even if they didn't want to. The engine gear system added shock, engine gears that replaced spin gears, and used springs to let the Beyblades change its attack pattern mid-fight. The heavy metal system was a big departure though, as it took the attack rings and swapped plastic for metal. Now the blades that your Bey attacked with, they were gonna do some real damage, and this led to the biggest piece of power creep in maybe the whole franchise. Heavy metal Beys were just better than any Beys that came before them, and worse yet, were completely incompatible with all Bey parts released beforehand, something the series had done a pretty good job with up until this point. The hard metal system was met with immediate backlash, as people did not appreciate having their entire catalog of Bey parts now locked out, and having the entire game focus around what the latest toy you bought was. Now, obviously, it's a toy brand. That's the point, is to get you to buy new toys. But with a toy line so entrenched with the idea of growing attached to your Bey and upgrading it continuously, asking players to start back from zero was never gonna go over well. That's a tad too much doom and gloom for right now though, because the anime was going as strong as ever, with the sequel series V-Force and G-Revolution airing and doing great. Although it did necessitate a pretty heavy art style change because you just drew Ash a little bit off model and got Tyson. This came with a bunch more video game tie-ins as well, easily the most famous being Beyblade V4 Super Tournament Battle for the GameCube. If you frequent sites of ill repute where you can download GameCube ISOs, this game is almost always near the absolute top, beating out a lot of Nintendo-made games like Pikmin and Kirby Air Ride. Starting up the game, and to soften the blow of what comes next, let me tell you that I love this game's style. The Y2K-themed menus and music both look on point and sound great. I can't think of many other ways to describe it than early 2000s Capcom fighting game, and I'm here for it all day. And with that, I have filled my quota of being nice for today. Let's start dumping. First things first, make a character. Pick a gender, boy. Pick a name, boy. I'm trying to save on my word budget. We pick our first Bey and enter the world of Beyblade. After it got flattened out in a book. Yeah, this game's menu is ugly as hell, but at least that's all it is, a menu. The game itself looks completely different and, weirdly enough, has Beyblades. Now, since there's no tutorial, all I can do is my best. Oh, brother. Okay, so the controls for the game are as follows. The control stick will ask the Beyblade kindly to move in a direction. Then the game will flip a coin. If it's heads, the Beyblade will refuse to move. But if it's tails, the Beyblade will also refuse to move. You can control the Bey to some degree, but every movement is met with such resistance that you can't control it like you would control anything else you've ever played. Bakugan gave you a hard time, but ultimately you could still decide where it went. Here it feels like you're fighting a tug of war between God and the devil as they try to take Ultimate Dragoon back. The B button will also activate a special move, with its power depending on which of these 3 bars has been filled. In the case of Ultimate Dragoon, an attack-type Bey, it will do a pitiful amount of damage and return to you some spin. Oh right, Beys have 2 health— no, shut up, we're done with the controls, there aren't any more. Beys have 2 health bars, one that determines how long you can spin, and the other that decides when you'll burst. Reduce either of these to 0 and you win. No, you will not, that was a joke. This game is horrible. If you aren't ride or die for Beyblades, and trust me, die will be the correct option, you'll be done by the end of the first game you play. You can't do anything to meaningfully interact with the game outside of vaguely gesturing in a direction for your Bey to go. You can clash with the opponent, but it's weak and lifeless. There's no recoil, no satisfaction, it's just a limp hit. It doesn't even sound good. Your attacks will always deal more damage to you than to the opponent. I don't know if it's because Dragoon is an all-out attack with no stamina type Bey, but the damage I dealt was nothing compared to what I took. It was maddening as I watched the game tell me time and time again that nothing I did mattered. Oh, and the special moves drag the game to a crawl whenever they happen. They're long animations with no interactability, and worse yet, no condition you need to meet aside from just pressing the button. Anywhere in the arena, any condition your Bey is in, just tap the button and suddenly you're up their nose. And of course, this is reciprocal, so you have no defense against a super move that's likely to knock you out of the arena. And they'll sometimes happen up to 5 times in a round! That's way too often for it to have any impact or feel special at all. It won't feel like this big climactic move that's gonna shift the dynamic of the battle. No, it's just another special attack. Oh, but don't worry, sometimes it just misses, that's cool too. I don't often think this because most of the time, even if it's a dumb decision, I can at least rationalize why a developer would make this choice. But honestly, what were they thinking? But what if you wanted to kill a beloved childhood memory, but you have jury duty the same day? Beyblade V-Force for GBA is the answer. And the question is, what if you made Marble Madness even worse to play? I'm gonna tell you right now, there are no good Beyblade games. I thought there would be one. There really isn't. It turns out that a game where the most enjoyable part is the visceral feeling of 2 tops hitting each other is lost really hard when it goes digital. Not to mention that when it does try something else, it decides to take an annoying and bad game and make it unplayable. Out of the 3 series I wanted to discuss, this was by far the hardest because the gulf in quality between the actual product and the games it gets is massive. Unfortunately, the same thing happened to Beyblade that happens to pretty much any fad, and it lost steam. Fans felt pushed away by the hard metal system, and after a valiant 5-year run, the line was retired and production stopped. That's 5 years in Japan, by the way. In America, we're talking a 2-year lifespan. And for something that's now practically a synonym for something that spins, that's an incredibly short shelf life. However, Beyblade's cancellation was more like a break, as in 2008, the line would be reintroduced. It's time for the V-Force series to end, and all pussies to go to bed. It's real man hours, let's metal fight this shit up. This is the Beyblade I know, and let me tell you something, after holding a V-Force Beyblade for the first time, I had to wash my hands. Look at this garbage. Not my Beyblade! The weight wheel has been upgraded from bit part player to the main event, as now the fusion wheel has been made entirely out of metal. This made the game of Beyblade something unbelievable. One of the most satisfying sounds in the world is the sound of 2 metal Beyblades clashing. It sounds like a sword fight, and makes the game so much cooler than when it was just plastic. It also gave Beyblades weight in a way that made them look incredible. Weight discs are fine, but keeping them hidden in the undercarriage of the Beyblade made them easy to miss. With the majority of the Bey now being metal, it was clear to anybody that saw them that these things could do some damage. I can't say enough about how the metal fusion wheels were a genius design, and the best one Beyblade has ever made. The rest of the Bey saw an upgrade as well. Bit chips were now face bolts and energy rings, actually impacting the power and performance of your Bey, as now energy rings affected aerodynamics, and instead of the twist and lock system from the V-Force series, face bolts not only presented the bit beast of your Bey, but also locked everything in place tightly, on top of metal face bolts adding even more weight. Spin tracks and performance tips replaced the spin gear and added way more customization, as they split the spin gear into 2 pieces that could radically change everything about your Bey. Uneven tips made Beys more erratic and attack-oriented. Wide tips made them more defensive and move less. Tall spin tracks made sure your Bey was gonna get bullied for looking like an idiot. Metal Fusion was and still is the pinnacle of the series for me. Everything was just a giant leap forward, and made up a ton of my childhood. Is there a link between this series being the one I grew up with and it being the one I think is the best? No, of course not. Don't be silly. All humans are objective 100% of the time. My favorite Pokemon are Landorus, Therian, and Incineroar in double specifically. You can build your Beyblade to do anything you want, and in the case of how it tied to the anime, sometimes literally. Obviously, Beyblade wins the race of which toy anime made their toy the most comically important to everyday life. Bakugan at least made their toys aliens. Yu-Gi-Oh! Made their cards magic. Most of the Bladers bought their Beyblades at a store. These are toys, and they can part the Red Sea. Some of the craziest include Storm Capricorn, who in the show had the ability to hop around the arena like a goat. And they managed to translate that into gameplay by giving it a notched tip and a spin track that you could adjust, to actually let the Bey hop around like it did in the show. One of my absolute favorite Beyblade memories is going to the store with my mom, and I guess the latest pleading for a new Beyblade was the one that worked, since I could pick out any one I wanted, and I already knew which one I wanted. Rock Leone. It was the one that Kyoya used in the anime, and it had, you guessed it, wind powers. I ran to the toy aisle, slowed down after my mom told me to, and found it. The last one, a Rock Leone. But then, as I'm leaving, this mom comes up to me and asks where the Beyblades are, and I show her where the aisle is. She tells me that her son has only ever wanted one Beyblade, and wouldn't you guess it, it was Rock Leone. I was so ready to be a little piece of shit and hide it. But I couldn't. I hid it back on the shelves, pointed it out, she thanked me and left. Murder, arson, tax evasion, drug dealing, Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just naming off all the crimes I can get away with now on account of good karma because I did that. Whaling, piracy. Now, like the previous series, the hybrid wheel system would get iterated upon as the 4D and synchrome lines. But when they came to America, they were handled in really confusing ways. The 4D system, which didn't really add much aside from weird gimmicks like multi-layered fusion wheels, was rolled out in the Metal Fury line as Hyperblades. The Synchrome line got treated even stranger in America since it was kind of a new series. They adapted it to be Shogun Steel, and this one marketing change, changing it from a Metal Series show to a Shogun Steel show, for me and everybody I knew at least, created a lot of confusion. Was it the same thing? Did it work with my older bays? It fell into the same problem the series always does, where it boxes out older models in favor of making people start over from zero. Now the gimmick was you could switch a fusion wheel, my apologies, warrior wheel, to get different properties. This pointless name change came along with the face bolts now being Shogun face bolts, and the main gimmick keeping them from being compatible with older bays, the element wheel. This tried to add a Pokemon-like type chart to Beyblade, but that doesn't really work. Now, the series did have a super cool gimmick, one that would be rolled into later series of Beyblades, with the Element Wheel and Warrior Wheel actually being interchangeable. So you could put one on top of the other in whichever order you wanted. This led to the best feature of the line, double chrome Beyblades. Double up on Warrior Wheels, and now you have a demon of a bay that can smash through anything, but tires out super quickly. That's a cool idea. Now it's time to die. The Zero-G Stadium that Shogun Steel bays were meant to be played in took the classic arena design and put it under constant earthquake watch. The thing would sway from side to side as the bays fought, and would further the split between the metal line and Shogun Steel. As if you wanted to play the way you were intended to, you had to buy a whole new stadium. Beyblade Burst was so much worse for this than Shogun Steel was, but this was definitely the epicenter of the stadium epidemic that would haunt the later series. And as if that wasn't enough to try to drain your wallets, they introduced Bay Wheels at the same time. Bay Wheels are Beyblades, but turned on their side, and with that, God's love leaves them. They're constructed like Metal Fight Beyblades, but with a humongous rubber wheel in the center instead of a fusion wheel. And as for fighting, I don't know how you're supposed to pick a winner when two tires crash into each other. The marketing tried to make it seem like they were more for stunts and trick shots, but who cares? Tell me what this does for the greater good. Then you watch the commercials, and the idea that Bay Wheels were for the streets is making me lose it, man. Oh, but what's a tire without a car to put it in? A better idea than whatever you thought up. Enter the Bay Raiders. Leave the Z alone, you're hurting it. Bay Raiders took your stupid little wheel and built a car around it, not understanding where a wheel goes on a car. Now it's all about collecting discs, and then the wheel comes back. That's cool. By this point, whatever Hasbro was doing, because yes, everything after Shogun Steel was Hasbro original, had diluted the brand and made everybody way more confused as to what was happening with Beyblades. I have not even shown you half of the Hasbro exclusive expansions that barely counted as a new thing, let alone an improvement. Bay Warriors defied all the odds and made Beyblades lame by sticking a big dumb action figure on the top, then embarrassing themselves in the ring. You know the fun was pretending it summoned a big monster, right? Oh, but Beyblade Stealth, now that was where it was at. Now your Beyblade could concealed carry, all for a scant $25 markup! It better be $25 better than the one I already own. One loss and you're going back to Target, Quetzalcoatl Hammer. Oh, but what about the XTS tips? All the fun of watching two giraffes neck each other, but in top form. A spherical arena. It doesn't work with your old bays, but don't worry, it doesn't work with the new ones either. By this point, enough was enough, and Hasbro had done what Hasbro does best, and that's bloat a toy line to the point of suffocation. Bay Raiders was meant to have a sequel line called Bay Warriors Cyborgs, but the line failed so spectacularly that not only did the Cyborg line get cancelled, but so did the entire metal line of Beyblades. Of all of the lines of Beyblade that have come stateside so far, the metal series, while still my favorite, easily had the saddest death, as it just had go-away heat by the end. New gimmicks, bad spin-offs. The last part of the metal saga, Metal Fury, came out in 2012. Shogun Steel would be born and die in the same year. Hasbro wouldn't stop beating the franchise with hammers until 2014. 2 years of underdeveloped, half-baked, bad toys just killed any and all interest in Beyblades, and for me personally, it would never come back. Now, there is one last piece of business to take care of before we move on. Remember how I've never told you the truth even once? You seriously thought my last name was last name? Dummy, it's first name, keep up! I said there were no good Beyblade games, but really, there is one. And it may not be much, but what's there is pretty darn good. Beyblade Metal Masters on DS. The DS and 3DS lines are no strangers to Beyblade games, and like most other attempts, it's just an adaptation of the game itself. Wait a minute, I don't get it. Beyblades are cool, Starfy is cool, how are the two not working together? Like I said, Beyblade isn't a game that adapts to video games very well. It's tactile, it's physical. It's something digital media just can't replicate. Sure, the Wii's Beyblade game at least let it rip, but after that there's not much to do. So what makes Metal Masters stand out is that it doesn't even try! Oh, crap, my thumb was covering the rest of this. Doesn't even try to replicate an unreplicatable game. Beyblade Metal Masters is instead a 3D 1v1 fighting game. This sort of genre shift is a really hard one to get right. For every duelist of the roses, there's a wheelie breakers. You have to be absolutely sure about how to adapt your toy to a different genre if you want it to succeed. It was handled by Hudson Soft, makers of Bomberman, Adventure Island, and co-developers on a majority of Mario parties. If there's anyone I trust to adapt Beyblade to video games, it's the people who adapted medieval torture devices to Luigi. Metal Masters manages to make this transition really, really well. The controls are simple. You have a standard attack button, a special move button, jump, guard, and a super attack. The regular and special moves can be modified by holding a direction and then pressing, and this unlocks a much deeper move pool than it seems on the outside. It's possible to string combos together, some bays excel at certain things, and depending on the energy ring you equipped, it can massively augment how your moves work. That's right, at the end of every battle in arcade mode, you get new parts to equip to 3 custom bays to use in the game's single-player and multiplayer modes. Tips, tracks, and fusion wheels modify the stats of your Beyblade and change the property of your attacks, but contrary to the real game, energy rings are the most important part, as they dictate your special moves. These range from charges, slams, and uppercuts, all the way to stuff like teleports and long-range sniper shots. Yeah, you can make a zoner Beyblade, for if treason and jaywalking weren't horrible enough crimes. The amount of customization with over 200 different parts to collect, on top of the way Beyblade customization was translated to a fighting game, are ingenious. Any type of fighter you can think of, you can make. Speedy glass cannons, slow walls, grapplers, because there are throws in this game, you're only limited by what parts you own. Now, there are mechanics that don't translate as well. No matter what bay you construct, you're gonna want to put some points into speed, because otherwise, the slightly unresponsive controls can be a real pain. They're fine for the most part, and I kinda like how it plays into the gameplay, but approach can take forever in some cases depending on the bays. Defensive type bays also just don't have as much of a purpose in this game. In the real game, they're meant for turtling and tanking shots as the opponent sleeps themselves out. Without a time limit or a draining spin meter of some kind, it's not really applicable. Also, having to play the game so much to unlock new parts can be a hassle, but with the password system, you can get them for free! Oh, damn, I forgot the rest again. Free! Money from your wallet. Well, I can't really get to the store right now 13 years ago, so let's see if it will just take my credit card number. Ah, damn it, too long. Oh, my social security number will fit perfectly! Arcade mode takes you through 4 different fights, and to my surprise, they went through the trouble of giving each character, all 35 of them, unique arcade mode intros, endings, and dialogue. I was expecting so much less effort, like just show me Tetsuya, that's enough for me. Now, sadly, custom bays can't be used in arcade mode, but as a trade-off, each blader comes equipped with their fully completed bay from the show. So even if you don't own a piece, you can still use the bay if you have the right blader. After a quick mash to up your stats, the fight begins and you get a chance to control things. Movement is intentionally a little unreliable, as the bay has a lot of momentum to it and will keep moving after you stop. And while that would be frustrating given the sense of control you lose, you at least get to rest assured knowing someone else has it as bad as you do. The computer, for the most part, isn't much better at controlling the bay than you are, so you're on equal footing in that regard. If you can believe it, the loose controls actually make the game more enjoyable, as your ability to position yourself and line up attacks matters a lot. This game is one where chip damage and hit-and-run styles aren't going to work. You've got to go for all-out attacks whenever you can, and that means being in the right spot to take advantage of an opponent's whiff. Ending lag in this game is stupid high. You're a sitting duck after attacking, so if you can catch the opponent out after they fail to land a hit, especially a special move, you can get in and do loads of damage. This made the game weirdly skill-intensive, making you work really hard to get in and do damage, but also make you realize when it would be a bad idea to stay in and make you get away in time. Special moves that cover a lot of range can be useful for that, either on the approach or for an escape. As soon as you see an opening, or see your opening close, the choice of whether or not to approach or back off is gonna be what decides the match. The arena size as well makes it possible not only to run away easily, but also makes too much running away dangerous, as it widens the gap by a lot and makes the approach a lot harder when you're coming to them. The arena size also means that ring outs are far less common than crash outs, and the first time you deal with a bay whose gimmick is to go for ring outs like Cetus, you're gonna be thankful for that. There is no other fighting game that attempts something like this. From the customization, to the movement, and pick-and-choose battling style, something this experimental being a licensed DS game threw me for a loop when I started labbing out combos. I was labbing out combos in a Beyblade game! Of course, it's not perfect. Like I said, each blader comes with their own bay, and not all of them are created equal. Of the starting 3, Jenga is a speed demon who's constantly attacking and can choose his fights. Masamune is what he was in the show, Gas Station Jenga, but his combo game is some of the best on the roster. And then Tsubasa shows up. This centrist uses a balance type bay, which means he's not really good at anything, and he controls worse than the other two do. This is fine when you're playing as Jenga and Masamune, as in arcade mode you construct a team of 3 bladers to play in a best 2 of 3 format, and in that format you don't ever have to play as Tsubasa if you just put Jenga and Masamune in front of him. But when going through and playing as Tsubasa, you have no choice but to play as him. This gets really bad when you get to the final boss and organizer of the tournament, Agito, with his bay Nightmare Rex. I honestly can't decide which phase is harder, since the first phase may be in a standard arena with no gimmicks like sliding or slowed down speed, but his attacks are better than his second phase, with a full screen super fast scream that hits multiple times and a stomp that can break your guard. After beating him though, he transforms and reveals that he's actually the coalesced anger and hatred of the dinosaurs after they were killed by the meteor that has returned in the form of a Beyblade, and wants to drain the power of bladers to revive the dinosaurs. Listen! His methods are unethical, but a pro-dino stance is one I can get behind. This phase only has 2 special moves, a grab and a charge. And while they deal loads of damage, more crashes are going to happen thanks to his super move than any other. I haven't discussed them much because this guy uses them more than any opponent. Super moves are your cinematic level 3s that vary in power depending on which blader is using them. Some only need 1 bar of super meter, while others need all 3. The payoff there is that while weaker ones can be spammed more, the more costly ones shred the opponent. Using them leaves your bay wide open, and a well-timed guard snuffs them out completely though, so it is balanced. But what if you use them in a way where the opponent can't guard? Super moves are okay to throw out raw or when in the right position, but become unbeatable when used as counters. If an opponent's bay is too close for comfort, use a special move and he'll be sent flying back to give you room to breathe. That adds a whole new layer to the approach, since getting too close without thinking means an instant loss, as the opponent will pop a super and you can't stop yourself before running into it. Now if your opponent has one, you have to try to bait them into using it before they could use it properly. Get them to waste it, then your approach is safe. Of course, Agito can't really be tricked this way since his special arena automatically fills the super meter really fast, so both him and you get the chance to spam your supers as much as you want. After beating him, you get a little cutscene for each of your characters, unlock a new one, and end the game. You really only need to play arcade mode 3 times though, since you beat him with Tsubasa to get you, then you beat you to get... Oh, great heavens. I love Ryuga with all my heart. He's a Looney Tunes character forced to be in an anime about toys. So Ryuga is... Shut up, we're talking about Ryuga now. Ryuga is the user of Lightning El Drago. And you may be asking, why use a bay that advertises itself as a loss in the name? Remember when I said the Bible had a whole Beyblade chapter ripped out? El Drago parted the Red Seas, conquered Japan, and probably had something to do with that time JFK's head did that thing. If you listen really closely on the Zapruder film, you can actually hear somebody say Dragon Emperor Soaring Bite Strike. No idea why it was removed in the special editions. El Drago is stupid strong in the show thanks to its ability, directions. Almost every bay is built to spin to the right. But what makes Drago special is that it spins to the left. In the show, it let him absorb the power of right spinning bays and use it against them, and then it would feed on the anger of the bladers that got beaten by him. That's where Ryuga comes in. Ryuga is such a colossal piece of shit that he goads his opponents into getting angrier by taunting them with how outmatched they are. And the way he does this to Jinga especially is comedy gold.
Oh no! Jinga's special move has no effect on El Drago!
Pegasus! I can't believe it!
Believe it! No bay can ever win against Lightning El Drago. Not then, not now! And not from here on in. And that's just the way it is! You got it, capiche? Stand up, Jinga! I'm not finished with you! Not by a long shot! Stand up and face me! Stand up! Amuse me like only you can! You're not even a threat! Go and get a better bay from your daddy, why don't you?
Huh?
No, I gotta say, I always knew that your old man and his bay were second-rate, you know.
What did you say? I'm not sure I heard you right. Try saying that one more time. If you dare to make fun of my father again, you're gonna pay for it big time!
Jinga!
I'll say it 1,000 times. Your father couldn't cut it. If the parent isn't tough enough, then what do you think the son will be like? The same, so grovel at my feet just like your father did. Do you think you can defeat me with such weak attacks? You're being cowardly!
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
Jinga doesn't even break a sweat before El Drago, and when he has to go one-on-one with the Great One, he gets washed, hung out to dry. Jinga gets a rage boost mid-match, then Ryuga beats the rage boost. This is the first time anybody's ever fucked up the rage boost. You're not supposed to lose after the rage boost, then it's just a temper tantrum. Nobody gets out of a Ryuga battle without serious mental damage. Stadiums don't get out of a Ryuga battle without serious structural damage. Jinga's only able to beat him in their rematch by keeping his dead friends on the phone so he can overdose on good vibes. And unlike any other villain, after getting beaten by the main character, he just won't go away. He upgrades Lightning Eldrago to Meteor Eldrago, and gets so bored with the entire setting that when unworthy bladers try to fight him, he won't even use his launcher and just tosses the bay down so it can rev up solely by stealing spin. And this works in the real world! A combination of left turning and rubber bits on Eldrago means it's possible to spin him with your hand, then beat a bay launched from a launcher. It's the stupidest thing in the world. It's so goddamn stupid that it works like it does in the show, but it's so cool for that. After transitioning from main villain to natural disaster with an attitude problem, Ryuga shows up every now and again to do something stupid, like beat the European champion team 4-on-1, blow up a building for wasting his time. Heck, he even gives Jinga an assist because it'd be funny. By the end of Metal Masters, he destroys a floating city with a single shot from Eldrago. But that's nothing compared to Metal Fury. Metal Fury's all about finding legendary bladers. Or rather, finding them desperately trying to put back together their shattered pride, because Ryuga was just here and he beat the shit out of them. Jinga finally has enough and challenges Ryuga to the rubber match to decide who's better, and Ryuga wins! He has a winning record over the main character and only loses one more time to the god of Beyblades and dies! I guess you could say that this Ryuga fella had some real Black Air Force energy. Oh yeah, he's also pretty fun in the game too. As far as content goes, the game does start to falter a bit, but at the same time, DS games have a weird relationship with content as it is. I feel like the best DS games are good in short bursts, so you can have some feeling of accomplishment on a car ride or while waiting for something. And a 20 to 25 minute arcade mode fills that role pretty well. You have that arcade mode as well as free battles, survival mode, and a mission mode that acts as a tutorial. Hey, you want to complain about a lack of content? How about 100 different missions to do? Is that enough content for ya? As a whole package, I can't say how big of a surprise Metal Masters was. Adapting Beyblade to a genre that it somehow never tackles again, working with the limitations of a system to make a simple but charming visual design, making a fighting game that manages to stand alone in a genre that it created, then abandoned, there's nothing else like it. And hey, with Wi-Fi battles letting you play with your friends, I'm sure it'll get onto the main stage of my crappy fighting game Evo. Now, from here on is truly uncharted waters. The latest experience I had with Beyblades prior to this was seeing them advertised at wrestling shows. I was 16 when the newest Beyblades came out. It was time to put away childish things and focus on what really matters. Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, this series we're going into, the Burst series, is easily the longest lasting series of Beyblades ever. V-Force and Metal stuck around for a few years, 4 at the most. Burst managed to hold on for an entire 6 years. Despite the length, this series never actually underwent a new system change the way that V-Force and the Metal series did. Whereas those eventually feature-crept out older bays, every bay from the Burst era used the Burst system. An energy layer that filled out the role of the fusion wheel and energy disc, the return of the weight disc, now called a forge disc for weight and stability, and the performance tip from the Metal series, now horribly confused as to where its friends went and why the spin track was permanently stuck to it, make up a Burst Beyblade. Now, as for why it's called the Burst system, faulty craftsmanship. In the first gameplay innovation the series has seen since the beginning, Beyblades introduced bursts. This allowed bays hit enough times, or hit hard enough, to explode, spreading their parts out all over the arena, and was worth a whopping 2 points as opposed to ring-outs and sleep-outs with only 1. This necessitated a huge change in construction, as no face bolts were used, and instead the bay is held together by a set of spring-loaded pins and the performance tip, for quick reassembly after a burst. Now, I had my reservations about the series as a whole. I think the Beyblades themselves overall are less visually appealing than the Metal series. I think construction, at least on this one Hasbro Beyblade that I bought, is really annoying and hard to lock into place right. But the burst gimmick, it's perfect. There's no better gimmick for Beyblades than being able to shatter your opponent's will and their body with superior construction. Bursts make the game more fun to watch, encourage bays to get stronger and more defensive in equal measure, and is a feature that should stay around as long as Beyblades are produced. On top of that are the gimmicks that came out of the burst system that are ingenious, like energy layers that can actually lock up to avoid bursts, or energy layers that are meant to fly off and create hazards in the ring so that the opponent's bay gets tripped up. It's too good to be true, honestly. The Burst series also had the smallest number of parts out of the whole franchise, with only 3, compared to V-Force's 4 and Metal's 5. So then how was it able to last longer than both of them? The layer system. Constant updates to the technology of the top's structure that, if you can believe it, never outmoded what came before. The series was the first to not introduce a gimmick that completely invalidated a majority of parts in the game. The only major snag coming with the divide between Takara's Beyblades and Hasbro's Beyblades, which, just wait. The layer system. Alright, this is gonna be hard. Each other series underwent 3 or 4 changes to their makeup. While keeping the base system of Burst the same, Takara and Hasbro introduced 11 different systems for how to construct a Burst Beyblade, most of which revolving around the energy layer. Oh, the layer system affects the layers. Cool. But what does this water pump? I don't know nearly enough to tell you every subtle nuance between them, and God knows trying to learn had my head spinning like a Bakugan! It starts out as single layer, then goes to dual layer. A bit of a radical jump from single and dual, as the next one is the God layer system, adding stuff like frames for the forge disc, God chips which you could slot into the energy layer to add weight and strength, and special gimmicked energy layers that could move to deal extra damage, or even shift from left to right turning. From here, the toy line splits between America and Japan. Japan would get the Cho-Z line, which introduced metal back into the energy layers and made them clash like they would in the Metal series. Then it would get the Katinko layer system, which split the energy layer into 3 separate pieces for increased customization and utility. The Super King layer system kept the 3 separate pieces, but introduced a new replacement for forge discs: chassis. The next revision, the Dynamite Battle layer system, revised the 3-layer rings into the core, the blade, and the armor. The center which held the design, the outer layer that had the striking points, and the undercarriage that added weight. This also allowed for variant constructions like the Synchrome series' Chrome and Crystal Up, as you could choose to put the armor on top of the blade and core, or under it for a high or low center of gravity. This is where the Japanese line ends, so what about the Hasbro originals? Well, it begins with the Sling Shock series, which introduced stance-changing tips, then interacted with the specific Sling Shock Stadium, which of course made it very popular. The Hypersphere system, on top of being a different version of the Katinko chip system, would also introduce new tips that worked with the Hypersphere Stadium to allow you to access the top rope to drop down on top of opponents. The Speedstorm system had new tips that worked with the Speedstorm Stadium to let you access the Power Vortex to hit the opponent harder. So, you noticed this sucks, right? The first 3 new ideas Hasbro got to make were the definition of gimmicks. I know I called stuff before gimmicks, but this is as gimmicky as it gets. Oh, buy new toys and the new stadium and you'll get to be higher up than your friends. I'm 6'5", I'm higher up than my friends by default, even if they stand on each other's shoulders. The Takara line had an element of expansion to it, like each system built on the last. You can clearly chart the progression from Katinko to Super King to Dynamite Battle. But Sling Shock, Hypersphere, and Speedstorm all just tell you to buy the latest stadium so you can actually notice what makes your toys different. It's such a downgrade in quality that extends into the next Hasbro line, Quad Drive. This added armor to the performance tip that could be removed to change how the base spins, as well as adapting the dynamite battle system with new gravity rings. What in Japan were metal are now flimsy plastic, and you get no sense of difference when you swap the position from the bottom to the top. In fact, flimsy is the exact word to describe it. The Beyblade I own from the Burst line is a Quad Strike, and when I tell you it's McDonald's level plastic, you know exactly what I mean. It's so low quality and cheap feeling, I don't doubt it's exactly as good as it has to be to pass inspection, and not a single percent more. This thing loses 1% of quality and it turns to sludge. The difference in detailing between Takara and Hasbro Beyblades is just... it's kinda sad. I mean, look at the difference between this Beyblade and this Beyblade. This one has the metal bits painted on. The Hasbro branch of Beyblades is such a lower quality that when I was looking for the parts that made up my Beyblade, everybody said that the parts were so bad compared to their Japanese counterpart, they should be for collecting purposes only. The gulf in quality is most noticeable in the final Burst era Hasbro branch, where they just said F it. The Pro Series are a set of Beyblades meant to directly import Takara models to be used by the professionals, including unaltered gimmicks like the Super King and Dynamite battle system. Except that doesn't work properly because they still make it from cheaper material. Skimp out on gimmicks like dash drivers that make it harder to burst bays. It's a line meant to cater to competitive bladers that can't even do that right. Oh right, competitive Beyblades. Yeah, Beyblades have an organized tournament scene with on-ramps to a world championship. Okay, rest of the world except for Japan, we're keeping fucking wolves from entering the Westminster Dog Show, just let the kids have their fun. Overall, after having gone through the Burst series, I can say that it's a marked improvement. The leaps made in Beyblade production are noticeable, they're tangible, and they're fun! In Japan, in America, the line tanked in terms of quality and feel worse than even the original V-Force generation of bays. And compared to the Metal series, get out of town! The series didn't have a drastic drop in sales that canceled the line. No, instead Takara was finally able to gracefully bow out of a generation of Beyblade. And who better to play the harp on their way out than the final Bay released in the Burst line, Barricade Lucifer Illegal Bearing Mobius -10. Did I mention the naming guy has lost his mind? Oh, and the games that came out during this time? Well, aside from a mobile app, none of them were translated into English. No, if you want to play a Beyblade game, go to Roblox, bozo.
Hey kids, it's me, Jinga Hagane, and I love Beyblades. I love attack type, I love defense type, I love stamina type, and I love balance type. The only balance I love more is the balance on your parents' credit card. The number on the back look a lot like Bay Park codes. Why don't you tell me them, along with the expiration month and year?
That leaves us with the present of Beyblades, and you might be asking, well, what's next? Well, I like the question, but it's got a few too many T's, needs to drop the N, and set that E free, and you've got it! Beyblade X is the latest version of Beyblade that released at the end of 2023 in Japan, and is currently set for a release in America sometime this year. So, what's the gimmick this time? What makes Beyblade X different from V-Force, the Metal series, and Burst? Well, frankly, the gimmick is that they're better than the rest. After learning about V-Force, remembering the Metal series, and appreciating Burst, I can say without a doubt that this new iteration, Beyblade X, is the best Beyblade line, and it isn't even close. It retains the makeup of the bays from the Burst line, 3 pieces: the blade, the ratchet, and the bit. The energy layer, forge disc, and performance tips new versions. Blades are now all hard metal outsides, with bit beasts inside, merging the best of the Metal series into the best of the Burst series. Ratchets can vary in height and weight that determines how your bay acts, and the bit at the bottom will determine how it spins. The whole thing's construction is stupid easy. Remove the bit, twist the ratchet, it's disassembled. If it bursts, which the line keeps from the Burst line, reconstruction is as simple as 1, 2, die! The construction, though, is so much more complex, as for the first time, the bit only connects to the bit beast in the center, meaning the center of the bay is free spinning. What does that mean? That means that if the tip were to catch on to something, then these notches on the bit would ride them and make the bay move faster than ever before. Everybody say hello to the Beyblade X Battle Arena. I am in dangerous territory and close to saying American thing bad, Japanese thing good when I say this is a great addition to the toy line. But I have my reasons. First off, every bay in the X line is built with this stadium in mind, given how bits are designed. How it works is that these notches on the edge of the arena will let the bay ride them, and boost up to ludicrous speeds. On top of how the bays themselves act, or at least the two that I bought, this is the most violent goddamn Beyblade line I've ever seen. The instructions say don't use them against burst bays, and yeah, I can see why they'd be eaten alive. This is just an old plastic arena I had kicking around, and these bays are literally shaking it like they're gonna destroy the whole thing El Drago style. This isn't even with the bay stadium, so it's probably not even as violent as it could be. The metal clashing is so satisfying. Bursts are as great as ever. It's faster and more impactful than ever. The way they keep finding new ways to innovate on the tops is a marvel of toy making. These are also the first Takara bays I owned, since my Quad Strike bay was a Hasbro creation, and let me tell you, if the whole burst line is up to these standards, then we were robbed. Speaking of robberies, Hasbro's still handling the production of these bays, and I have no doubt they're currently cooking up some truly heinous bullshit to make them as cheaply as they possibly can. Do you have any idea how weird a journey this has been? Do you think most people know how mechanically complex these spinning tops with dragons on them are? Do you think any more of them actually f***ing care? I never gave the technical side of Beyblades a whole lot of thought, since I was more just interested in owning a bunch just for the sake of owning them. But it only takes a few minutes of searching to show just how complex these toys really are. Hundreds of articles, dozens of YouTube videos, all breaking down how these things work. Obviously, I can't bring this sort of stuff up at a job interview, but I really enjoy Beyblade, both at a primal level of watching two things hitting each other, but also from a construction aspect. A lot of work goes not just into production to make each piece affect a bay's performance differently, but also into discovery, finding out how best to mix and match parts to find combos that work. Really, I don't see much difference between Beyblade and a TCG like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Both are about finding combos with pieces of support slowly trickled out across different waves, sometimes majorly switching up how the game is played, and both are very frustrating to explain to your family, why you're allowed to write toys off as a business expense. With any luck, Beyblade X will flourish in America like I'm sure it can, and a whole new generation will know the joy of getting scraped by a Beyblade as you try to catch it while it's spinning, like the family dog biting you for the first time.